Okay, I'm going to call this village board meeting for June 3rd, 2019 to order. Roll call, please.
Bill Zuckelberg.
Here.
Sue Springman. Here. Bill Branham.
Here.
Bill Zellner.
Here.
Bill Willems.
Here.
Aaron Moran. Gary Hertzberg.
Here.
Okay, so I'm going to assume that everything was posted.
Yeah, I don't know how that got. So I can confirm that the draft agenda was published in the Waunakee Tribune on May 30th. The final agenda was posted on May 30th as well in all 3 village posting locations. And the final agenda and meeting packet were made available online on May 30th. And then the liquor licensing annual review notice was published in the Waunakee Tribune on May 23rd.
Perfect. Thank you. First item is consent agenda. Would anybody like anything pulled or look for a motion?
I'll move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Motion by Joe Zitzelberger,
Second.
second by Susan Springman. Any other comments? Call the question. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Public comment. Is there anyone here who would like to address the board on an issue that's not on the agenda for this evening?
I just wanted to make an announcement. Okay. I want to make an announcement that the monument unveiling for the Waunakee area EMS will be June 26th at 6:30 p.m. Refreshments are afterwards, and everyone, I hope you just keep hoping the weather holds for that, so thanks.
And your name was?
Nyla Fry,
Thank you.
East Berlin Avenue.
Thank you. Okay, anyone else? Todd, any comments tonight? Okay, I'm good too. Anybody else? All right, let's move on. So first we have a presentation of draft capital improvement plan by Ellers and Associates.
Thank you. So, did you want me to just jump in, Todd, or did you have any?
I'll just give a little bit of background. So the proposal to do the work that Todd just completed for the village was included in the budget for 2019. We wanted to take a careful look at the slate of public projects and costs and ability to fund and afford them going forward, which includes the view out to the tax rate impact of various purchases and borrowings. So we budgeted for this work this year. Todd's got a draft up to share with you tonight. And the plan isn't for you to adopt this or take action on it tonight, but to keep in mind as the village board continues with work in strategic planning in the coming months, as well as budgeting for 2020 and years beyond. So what we'll see here is a tool that we'll be able to make use of. I think we're looking for tonight probably initial feedback and additional questions that we can then come back to you again on.
So Renee, if I could have you jump to page 6 of 11, which is the first of the spreadsheets, we'll kind of just walk through those quickly and see that's impossibly small for reading. But so Todd mentioned the slate, and that's really that top half where we have capital improvements and equipment. And in the far right-hand column, we've got about $53.2 million in projects over a 10-year period. The larger ticket items that would be included in there are a pool in 2026 at $6.5 million, $6 million for a sports complex in 2028, and $3 million for a village hall in 29. Also, one thing I want to point out is the plan assumes $2 million of street improvements annually, which would be a higher level of funding than you've had in the past. We have certain sources of revenue available that would be applied on a cash basis so that you would not have to finance that. That amounts to about $24 million over the 10-year plan. One thing I wanted to note is you're presently appropriating $1 million a year for street improvements. And what we put in the plan, this would be that street capital where you see the 1.1 million. You notice that ramps up by $100,000 a year, so that by the time we get into the 10th year of the plan, you're at $2 million. So part of it is what you've already been appropriating, but part of it would be an increase by $100,000 per year. And when we look at the next sheet in a moment, you'll see that we factored that in as an increased cost along with that. When we take the 53 million in projects and we net out the 24 million, we have about $30 million left that would have to be financed with that. That would be the lower right-hand number in that far right column. And for purposes of analysis, what we assume would happen is we would borrow every other year for 2 years worth of capital projects. That can be done in different ways, but that's what we put in the plan just for the sake of modeling. So that's again the slate that Todd mentioned, how we would pay for it both on a cash and a borrowing basis. And the next thing we want to take a look at is then the impacts of that.
I would, if you wanted to pause just quickly on the slate of projects, just because that slate is in this list here doesn't make them certain for completion, nor on the particular schedule that was outlined here. This is really a planning document, not a firm and hard document. So what we instructed department heads to do, Renee and I and Todd asked department heads, if you see the potential for a project, let's show it so we can understand the affordability or lack thereof to then scrap this or that. So this, the laundry list that staff put forward, kind of they looked at the broad scope of potential within their department's realm.
And you'll notice we call this the base scenario. The next page of the plan, which I'm not gonna go through, because all of the numbers on this are the same, other than we tested the model, and if we took the pool and we funded that in 2022 instead of 2026, we wanted to see what the difference in the impact would be. So all of your numbers are the same here, it's just a matter of timing on this particular run. So the next page then shows the impacts. And what we show on the left-hand side is the existing debt and what you'll be required to levy going forward with no additional borrowing. In the center, then, we show estimated debt service for all these various projects that have been identified. And on the far right-hand side, assuming property value of $100,000 initially, so fair market value, the three columns reflect what the tax impact would be per $100,000 for your existing debt only, the proposed debt, and then that additional cash funding for street levy increase. So in this example, this plan peaks out in the year 2029, and you'd have about $66 for existing debt, $102 for proposed, and $46, $47 for the cash levy increase. So about $215 or about $69 higher than you're paying today. Any questions on that?
$69 per.
Per 100,000 of fair market value. So if you had a $300,000 home, it would be 3 times that.
For all of it.
That's just for the whole menu of the 10 years worth of projects. And as Todd mentioned, this is basically the first step in providing you information so you can look at, evaluate, and then make judgments as to priorities and affordability for the project. The next page is the scenario, moving the pool up, and again, we won't go through this in detail because I'm going to come back to a summary table that was in the memo showing that comparison. The last display for each of the scenarios would be your debt capacity utilization, and what we've got is 5 years of history, and then we have the percent of limit, which is the constitutional limit of 5%. And what this shows is that even though we would be borrowing more debt as we're paying off existing debt, we actually have a declining use of that constitutional limit. The other item we calculate is the direct debt burden, which is the way Moody's evaluates it. It's essentially the same as your debt limit calculation, just a slightly different way of looking at that metric.
Hey, Todd, can you spend a little more time, or maybe you and Renee can tag team on it? I got a question from a citizen earlier today about explaining further what that state constitutional limit is and how that applies, and then how the village's debt policy, its own debt policy, is different than that.
Well, I'll take the first part, and perhaps Renee will comment on the policy. So the state constitution indicates that you can never have any more general obligation debt principal outstanding than is equal to 5% of your overall fair market value of all property in the community. So that's the state requirement.
And ours is 50% of that. So we can't, so basically 2.5% of all of the fair market value, also called the equalized value for the village. So our internal policy is much more stringent than what the state would allow.
And we stay within that under this scenario with
Right,
these
yep.
projects, under 2.5%.
Yep, our highest on, was 2018, where we were close to 42% of the limit, so still well under our 50% policy, and it just keeps decreasing after that.
The follow-up question from the citizen then, Todd, is on Exhibit 5, which is the calculation that's used? Is it the state limit or the village's?
The state.
Okay.
So in other words, if you were to be at 50 or greater on this, you'd be above your limit, but in this case, you would not be.
What are you projecting for increased values on an annual basis?
We're assuming a 3.8% increase per year, which is 50% of your 5-year historical average.
So we've been closer to 7%.
In the good
growth.
times. That's
What?
without a recession and no
Mhm.
building going on. If we hit that blip, yeah.
And again, you do have room, obviously, because you do have a declining utilization, that even if you were to see that moderate in terms of the percentage, you would still be under the limit.
The library debt is still on here?
Including the new library debt that we will be taking out this year once all the final costs are in. That's factored in already.
If we could go down to this thing was the second to last page of the memo. So just a snapshot here then of the two scenarios side by side. So as you'd expect, and again, this is per 100,000 of fair market value. If we move the pool up to 2022, you see that ramp up a bit quicker in terms of what that payment would be. While the spreadsheets show going out past 2030, I stopped the table here for the simple reason that if you have additional debt, it would start layering on in the year 2031. So really the best place to look right now in terms of the impact would be that next 10-year period to coincide with the length of the plan. And then the final table is also just a side-by-side comparison of that debt capacity utilization. And again, as you'd expect, if we move the pool up, you'd be consuming a higher percentage of that capacity at a slightly earlier point in time. And now that we have it all in the model, this is very easy for us to test different assumptions as to growth rates, different levels of funding, things of that nature.
Now, this doesn't take into account our budget changes and tax rate.
No.
When you add the operating expenses and
Strictly
all this
capital.
debt and all these buildings
Mhm.
onto that. It's important to remember, because the library was a much bigger number than we had thought originally. And we haven't seen these projects, so we don't really know what the detail is of them yet, so we don't, just came.
We haven't started talking about several of
No.
them yet. Questions from board members for Todd?
Just curious, what's our equalized value over the years? What has it gone up? Is there an average?
I don't know as he has in here, our 5-year average was somewhere around 7%. I could gather that data.
That's fine, that's fine.
Todd,
This takes into account increasing everything that we talked about, period. The 1 million to 2 million for the roads, everything. That was something that I felt was important when we put this to the test, was increasing our road funding. Make sure we take care of those, especially if we have similar tough winters as we had this year. I think moving forward, as we add roads, we're gonna continue to do that. As you saw, we were bumping it on an annual basis, over 10 years. Pool was just thrown in from, it was the #1 thing chosen in the survey, or that was supported, that people were interested in the community, so felt that we should put that on there as well as a potential project. Outside of that, I don't think there was any the village hall was.
I put, again, Village Hall in just as part of the laundry list, because as we look out to our continued growth and redevelopment hopes, this corridor, the Century Avenue corridor, just as we looked at Main Street strategically 15 years ago and started to make plans and establish mechanisms to facilitate redevelopment of that space, fair to say that probably 10 years out is when this corridor will be, speculating will be a priority for the village, for that sort of attention. If that's the case, then that would seem the logical time for a village hall relocation, if this were to be part of redevelopment. So that's the reason why I included that element.
Other than that, I don't think there's anything too shocking as far as.
What's the youth art
additions.
or sports center? I haven't heard of that.
Youth Sports Center.
Sue, did you want to take a stab at that one?
It's just been a conversation with a variety of different youth sports groups over the last many years, whether it's youth baseball, youth soccer. That conversation keeps coming up. It was a part of our long-term park and open space plan. Again, Todd and Renee asked us to compile a list of projects that we might consider, and so I definitely was a dreamer on my list.
Is this similar to the youth sports centers that have been built in DeForest, or there were private people that tried to do it? I think somebody did build something with their money somewhere around here.
Well,
It happened the last 5 years or so.
GRB has that baseball academy, but DeForest is building one right now, right?
Yeah.
It's in conjunction with GRB.
Okay,
It is?
that's what I heard.
Is that a public-private kind of
I
partnership?
think so.
Yeah.
Okay.
Don't really have anything definite. Again, mostly a placeholder for a
Right.
further conversation.
No, I know we've been approached, maybe it was 10 years ago by someone to do something across facility or something.
I have another question for you, Todd. As you see your clients, and you and I worked together 15 years ago, so I know you've seen a lot of municipalities pursue borrowings and projects and priorities to try to address them. When you see a community like Waunakee in our condition and looking at projects this far out like we are here, are there any warnings or concerns or issues of extra consideration that you think that you would advise to us to be aware of?
You know, as we're all aware, in Wisconsin, municipalities have very limited revenue raising options. So what that typically means is when you're financing capital projects, that you're gonna borrow for them. Now, one observation I had shared was that you actually are cash funding a much more substantial portion of your projects on an annual basis than many communities. So that gives you, some buffer or insulation there in terms of levy limit law flexibility. So that I see as a big positive. When I look at the overall amount you're looking to borrow, in my mind, it's really a question of affordability from the village board standpoint. From a pure debt level, I don't see any concerns. In fact, one other thing I might mention, if you go back to either of those final exhibits, Renee, if you could kind of blow up that column that's more to the right. Your bond rating is made up of a number of different components. Debt collectively is only 10% of that, so it's not the make or break of your rating. But that methodology I mentioned to you, you'll notice it uses the words moderate, strong, and very strong. Moderate means that your rating is, generally speaking, in the A level category on that particular aspect. Your overall rating is a AA2, so you're in the AA bracket, and that's what the strong rating corresponds to, and then the very strong is AAA, but of course that's going so far out there that we're not contemplating potential additional debt. So from just strictly a metric standpoint, what's occurring here, and again, yes, some of this is due to growth that we're assuming in the tax base, but you're actually moving into an indebtedness category that is more comparable to what a AA2 rated community would expect to be in. So in other words, there's actually improvement happening in that category, even though your taking on additional debt. So what that tells me is that, you know, from a growth and a planning standpoint, the amount of projects you're looking at and your ability to finance those projects is manageable. And again, it just comes down to the question of how much is that worth to the community in terms of the tax dollars that will be associated with that. So no red flags.
One follow-up based on your experience, in terms of our percentage of indebtedness here, how would you say we rank amongst our peers in debt burden in general? I know there's a lot of categories to that question, but
You know, it's really across the board. You don't see a lot of communities that are under 25%. You don't see a whole lot that are over 55 or 60, so you're kind of, you know, in the middle of that bracket right now. There are some municipalities in Wisconsin that, you know, are up to 70–80% of their debt burden. You know, that can be problematic. But there's also very few municipalities that, you know, have no debt or very limited debt. So you're kind of pretty average, I would say, for a community in a growing area that has a lot of capital and infrastructure needs to support that growth.
Okay. Any other questions? Phil? Bill? Quiet tonight? Joe? Any questions?
No, I think this is a good tool to have at our disposal.
Just, I know we're gonna have a lot more discussion on it, and I really think the operating expenses and what might happen with fire and EMS over time as well needs to be worked into all of it in case we end up taking on another fire station or having, did we incorporate all the fire trucks there?
I was gonna say, we did ask fire and EMS what their capital, what they foresee as their needs, and then took our percentage of that based on our current
have
share,
that in there?
and that is factored in here too. So whether they need, you know, new fire trucks, new
They have a list of all their fire
equipment,
trucks.
yeah, that's also in here, which we hadn't really done a lot of work with in the past.
That's good.
But your point is good, Sue, that also fire and EMS operating isn't addressed. You know, that's not
This is
evaluated
capital.
with this.
Any of these, and, you know, and me personally, I like to also look at what's going on for the total tax burden, which includes, are there new schools being built? I mean, what are people gonna pay at the end of the year? I know that this is our budget, but I think we all have to look at the bottom line, because people will only live here if they can afford it. And I have no idea what those numbers are. They may be fine, I just don't know. So I like to see ultimately the whole picture.
Have you seen, are there strategies, Todd, to take this analysis into a level that involves operating expense estimates?
There are. That is really, you know, taking the capital improvement plan and evolving it into an entire financial management plan that forecasts all of your funds.
I don't know what that involves. I just think it could be useful. Or you take it piece at a time when you're ready to take it up. I don't know, because we're not like proving the whole thing and saying it's gonna happen. There's probably maybe voter involvement in some of this as well.
I would assume there'll probably be voter involvement with this, most
Yeah.
of the things that we talked about in here. I think it's a real positive that even factoring all of these in, you're seeing our ratio go down, which we're obviously in a pretty strong position there, because if we choose to do none of these things, it'll go down even further and faster probably. So that puts us in a
That's good information.
strong position. Thank you for putting this together and
Thanks.
helping
My
us.
pleasure. I'm happy to help you use it as a tool going forward.
Thank you. I assume staff was done with questions, yes? Okay.
Can I-
All right. Next, we've got license and permits. Do I need to read all of these, Brian, or what's our,
No,
Caitlin gets to read all of them?
no.
No, yeah, I don't think.
So the next 21 items are all related to the annual liquor licensing and operating renewal period. If you remember, every year, operators and licensed establishments need to reapply to keep their privilege. So the first item, number one, is to discuss and take action on the annual operator license applications. These are the individuals who can self-serve and operate an establishment alone by themselves. There is a roster included with this agenda item, and all of the individuals listed on the roster are recommended for approval, subject to successful completion of an improved responsible beverage server training course. So that's the first action. Any questions?
I looked at all these, and I would recommend we approve the operator licenses for all applicants listed on the attached roster, subject to successful completion of approved responsible beverage server training courses.
I would move Phil's recommendation.
Okay, we have a motion by Phil Williams, second by Joe Sisselberger. Any other comments? Call the question, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it.
All of the next 20 items on your agenda are the license for the individual establishments. You may choose to approve all of the license as presented in the packet. Each motion for these items include the location's premise description and any sort of restrictions they have. So it's up to the board if they want to take them individually or do one motion for them all.
Move approval of all of them in unit.
Okay, we have a motion by Bill Ranum to approve all of them as one vote.
Second.
Second by Phil Williams. Any other comments? Call the question, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it.
Before we move on to the next item, sorry, I just want to also recognize and thank Lori Heltz, our deputy clerk, for her work on these licenses. It takes a lot of time, and she is very dedicated to it, and I'm really thankful for her dedication to it. It helps make it go as smoothly as it did tonight, so thanking her.
All right, next we have new business, discuss and take action on developers agreement for Kilkenny Farms West Commercial Center at the southwest corner of Woodland Drive and County Highway Q.
Brian's gonna take it. So if you look at starting on page 317 of your packet, you have, I think that's the cover page for this document. There is a recommended motion to approve the development agreements, I think subject to final review and approval by Kevin and by me. It is our, and this same agreement was part of your packet at your last board meeting. It is essentially our standard public improvements agreements. This would be applicable to the Kilkenny Farms West commercial development, which is at the corner of Woodland and Q. This is the development that would include the Festival Foods grocery store. We did have a request from Mike Lawton, who represents the developer, to make some changes to the document, and I just want to quickly describe those. I think from a staff level, we're okay with them. One of them is that typically within our residential subdivision agreements, and that's what this is, all the public improvements need to be accepted by the village before we would authorize the issuance of a building permit for any of the single-family residents in the individual lots. They would like to modify this language slightly because they believe that there's the potential for some coordination on the development of the Festival Foods lot at the same time that the public improvements may be done. And I think at a staff level, we're okay with that concept. So we're talking, still you would never get an occupancy permit for a lot within the development until all the public improvements have been accepted, but I think we're open to the idea of potentially allowing some work to be done by Festival Foods before all of the public improvements are accepted, because there's the potential for some coordination. So that would be one of the changes, and we're still kind of working through the language. But the other, if you look at the documents, one of the things that we need to do is we have a stormwater easement located within the land that is covered by the certified survey map right now. Then if you look at the CSM, there's actually, and it's not up there, I'm pointing, but it's not up there, there is an outlot within the CSM for stormwater purposes. Because we are getting this new outlot, then we're going to release the existing stormwater easement that we have. It's being replaced by the outlot. And so that's a section of the agreement right now. Mike and I need to work on exactly what that language is, but I think it makes sense from the village's perspective we don't need that easement anymore, so it's okay to release it. There's also going to be, I would say, some other minor issues that we'll work through, nothing of substance. The last issue, though, is if we go back to our last village board meeting, we did have a discussion about trail improvements on the west side of Q, similar to what is on the east side of Q. And I think there was a request by the developer to, well, I'm not even sure if it was a request by the developer. There was discussions between the parties about whether or not that trail really needs to be constructed on the west side of Q. And Kevin may have some information you can share on that, but what Mike Lawton asked me was, can we add language to the development agreement saying that the developer does not have to construct the trail on the west side of Q? And that's obviously a policy decision for the village board to make. I would tell you that if you're okay with that concept, then we would add language to the development agreement saying that the developer is not going to do the work. We already have the trail, and we want the trail to stay on the CSM. And then we would also add some language into the development agreement that would be somewhat open-ended, but the whole idea would be, even if it's not constructed now, it's going to be on the CSM, which would allow the village in the future, if it wanted to construct the trail on the west side of Q, just like we already constructed the trail on the east side of Q. And then we would add some language to the development agreement saying if we ever did that in the future, we would get at no cost to us, a temporary construction easement that would allow us to do that work. And so it may be it's obviously a decision for you to make, but I think it's, if we're not gonna do it now, then it's a good compromise that at least we'd have the ability to do it in the future, and the only cost that we would incur would be whatever the construction costs are, because we wouldn't have to acquire any land for either the trail or for a temporary construction easement.
I would just add that when we initially planned for the improvements for County Trunk Q, we did not anticipate putting a trail on the west side of the road. This document that's up on the screen is actually from our comprehensive plan. It's the Park and Rec portion, and it shows how we were anticipating a trail system along the Q corridor. And so that's what we built it, we planned it, and constructed in that way back when we made the Q improvements. There was a discussion at the Plan Commission. The Plan Commission debated it at times and said, I think the consensus was from the Plan Commission, their recommendation to you is to have a trail on both sides of the roadway. At a staff level, I'm comfortable with only having the trail on the one side in terms of public safety. Our planner said it's always good planning to have trails on both sides of arterial streets, so that's his recommendation. If you look at all the other trails that I'm showing up there, 80 plus or 90% of them only have a trail on one side of the road, like Peaceful Valley Parkway, Arboretum Drive, all the trails through the business park. That's typically been our standard. Either we get sidewalks on both sides of the road, or we have a combined 10-foot wide asphalt trail on one side of the road. And that's something I think we have to have a further discussion on going forward. I'm okay with having the trail only on one side of the road, but that's not what the Plan Commission recommended, so it's really up to the board to make that final decision.
Who paid for the trail? Where'd the funds come from on the east side? Wasn't that TIF
That was TIF.
increment? So, okay, and is that possible on the west side?
So we did take a look at that issue, and that was part of the discussion that we had at the last village board meeting. I think when we looked at the project plan, it was not didn't have the clarity that we had hoped for. And so if the village did want to use TIF funding from the Kilkenny TIF to pay for the trail on the west side of Q, there's a process that you can go through, and you can go to the joint review board and basically say, look, we believe that this project is in the project plan, and we want the joint review board to confirm that. And so if that's something that the village board wanted to contemplate, I think, and Todd, I think, had mentioned that process at the last village board meeting, that's likely the process that we would recommend. I mean, the other thing that I would add along with, if the village board were inclined to say, you know what, at this time, we don't think that we need this trail on the west side of Q, and we've kind of planned for the future, in case we want to do it in the future, we'll have the land, we'll have the temporary construction easement. The other portion of that is, this would be the only development agreement that would apply then to the Kilkenny Commons West development. At our last meeting, we contemplated the idea of doing an amendment to the existing TIF agreement, if, we wouldn't have to cross that bridge. There would be no TIF associated with this with the development on the west side of Q at all. So, but, you know, could you do it? Potentially you could, but I think we'd probably have to go to the joint review board to get their blessing that the trail on the west side of Q is in the project plan.
Is it?
I think that there's a very reasonable argument that there is. We do have language in the project plan that certainly contemplates the work being done on County Highway Q. I would say that there's absolutely no question that the work on the east side of Q, the trail work on the east side of Q is in there. It's not as clear with respect to the west side.
So my comment in regard to this, unless we make a decision to, let's see, it's 8th Street? Beyond 8th Street going up, there's duplexes that line Highway Q. There's nothing behind that going up there. There's no trail that's going up there. We have no trail that's in front of the funeral home. We have no trail that's in front of the church. This would be kind of one sidewalk that's kind of in the middle of no ends at this point. Whereas if we're crossing or coming in from the other side, there's going to be sidewalks on Woodland Drive going down there to come into the
We're gonna pull up the aerial.
area. Perfect. So I'm not as firm, I guess, is what I would say, and I'm a both sides of the street sidewalks person, I always have been. But this situation, it doesn't, I don't know that it necessitates having that sidewalk there.
Because the
Or
trail's
trail.
on the north side of Woodland, isn't it?
Correct. Well, it's gonna be on both sides though.
Well, we'll be on both sides?
Yes, there's on both sides. So there's gonna be plenty of access to get in
Access
here.
is, you're right.
You know, people coming up Woodland Drive, they'll be able to come right in. Do you have a shot of what it's gonna look like, Kevin?
Say again?
What's proposed, do you have that?
Proposed for what? I'm sorry, I was trying to
What the
bring this up.
proposal is for where the store is located and the roads that are coming in and where the sidewalks are?
Yeah, there'll be a sidewalk system as part of the Holiday Drive that's extended. And so you'll have that pedestrian connections internally, you just won't have it on the county trunk queue.
So my
However,
question
the
is,
trail
people-
that's on Woodland Drive would
People coming
stay
up
in.
Woodland, if they wanna cross at Woodland, they'll have a sidewalk to go across,
There'll be sidewalks on both sides of Woodland,
just not.
just because we wanted to get a trail system all the way down to the school.
I saw Mr. Tierney's hand up.
I'm not ready to ask him if he's got, I'm listening to you guys first. So,
I mean, just having ridden my bike up there, it is tough to cross. I mean, it was tough to cross. Now with the new lights, maybe it's not nearly as tough to cross.
you mean Woodland?
Q, I'm sorry. I mean,
Q on
crossing
Woodland?
would, yeah,
Woodland
just
and
staying
Q.
on, you're doing anything you can to get to the trail side, because it's a scary road.
Right, and that's what I'm getting at. So if you look on Q going up, so it's from Centennial Parkway, which is at the top right now, all the way down, you don't have sidewalk coming up to Woodland Drive back there. It's only on the other side, as you can see, that you've got it up there. So if we're gonna make a decision to put it in front of here, it would be, why wouldn't we have had it there? That's the connector spot. So if we're gonna connect that, then it makes sense, but I don't think we're looking at doing that right now. I think there's also some challenges, and Mr. Tierney can jump in when we get to this part. They're gonna be lowering that area, as you recall, so to get that sidewalk to make sense down into that zone, I think might be a challenge. But maybe it's steps, maybe it's a hill, I don't know. It has to be handicap accessible, so.
But we can preserve the right to do it in the future, which I
Correct.
think is the most important thing, because as we develop it and get more dense, then we see a different traffic pattern potentially in the future. Right now, I see it going nowhere. I mean, kind of a path to nowhere. I'd rather not build it too soon, so you have to rebuild it, just because it started too early, or and maintain it and all that stuff. But I'd want to preserve the right, definitely.
Yeah, so that's just my opinion. I mean, you guys can obviously weigh in, and if we wanna have it in there, we can enforce that it's going to be there.
I mean, I don't mind keeping it in there, but when I look at that, as a driver at that intersection, I've gotten used to the fact that there's a trail on that north side, and I see bike traffic going on that side. Now, if I had to worry about it, another trail over here, it almost makes it, I think, worse for a pedestrian or a biker, because you could be going on this trail here, you could be going on this trail over here, and you have multiple spots where pedestrians are coming this way. It's kind of identified with a single trail. Might be easier for, pedestrian. Or safer, at least.
Phil?
Putting it in would be kinda like that bridge on Highway 12 outside of Sauk City. There's no way to get to it.
Okay, Joe? Other than laughing at Phil's comment?
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel. We put this piece of the path in there, but we don't really have anything leading to or from it yet. So I think preserving our ability to put that in at a later date is a good option.
Bill?
Same.
Same? So I think would you like to speak in regards to this? I mean, I think we have a consensus right now that,
Years ago, I was at the International Builders Show, and we went to a conference on this, and it was very interesting. Because, for example, where the planning for Sarah Lane, they build Sarah Lane across, it's really not a full intersection. You'd have to be a crazy jaywalker if you ever want to go across Q in the middle between Woodland and Peaceful. Or you might say the Simon, or the Holiday South extended. They'll have walks on both sides. The other thing you gotta think about, where this is Highway Q originally, there's streets everywhere coming off of Q, there's sidewalks. It was more of a residential neighborhood. The way it's going now is the entrances of these communities would be more on the side streets. And it would almost be confusing if you had a 6-foot sidewalk there versus with the flashing lights. I was kind of against the flashing light deal until I see it really kind of works pretty good. So if you're going to the school, it's important to have a nice wide walkway west to the intermediate school. That's all there. There's a beautiful 10-foot trail on the east side. But to put that 6-foot that sidewalk right there, it's a fragment. That's the reason I'd be very happy if it's not there, because it's very confusing versus a beautiful 10-foot trail. You go to Woodland from anywhere, you're on it. You come up Peaceful Valley, you take the blinking lights or a stoplight, it's controlled, you're on the trail. But this one here it's kind of a fragment.
so I don't see anybody here from Festival Foods tonight. My concern only is that, did you have any conversations with them about the sidewalks? Were they, doesn't matter to us, or they really like it?
They didn't want it in the first place.
They don't want it in front, okay. So, do we have a consensus as far as, what do you need us to do?
So the recommended motion is motion to approve the developers agreement subject to any technical issues approved by the village attorney and village engineer. So I think we've identified some of the changes that if you approve that motion, there are gonna be some, I would say, very minor technical issues that aren't worth bringing up. And then some of the major, more major changes would be, we would be putting in, we would be putting in a sentence saying that at this time, the developer is not required to build the trail section that we've identified. We would add some language saying that we want to be able to get a temporary construction easement in the future, if the village wants to build it. And then, so then we've preserved our rights based on what's in the development agreement and in the CSM to do the work in the future if we want. Then there would be also some other changes that would relate to, again, the coordination of when public improvements would be done as they exist to the private lots. Potentially the building permits could be issued for lots, for lots 1, 2, and 3 before the public improvements are completed. We think that we can handle that. We still protect ourselves with whatever language we insert there. And we would be putting in that language regarding the release of the stormwater easement also, since we have the outlot 1 in the CSM. So I would say that that's kind of the context of the motion. If you make that motion, those are the types of changes that we would make to the agreement. So if you are okay with the trail not being constructed now by the developer, that motion would be supportive of that. If you aren't okay with that, we would need to hear that right now.
we heard that.
Yeah,
everything seemed to be
I
okay
think
with
you're
it,
right,
so.
so.
I'll make a motion to approve the developer's agreement, subject to any technical issues approved by the village attorney and village engineer.
Okay, motion by Gary Hertzberg,
Second.
second by Joe Zilberger. All right, any other comments? Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Next, we have discuss and take action on potential sale of village property at 710 South Street, which is the existing library site.
Okay, we listed this as discussion and action, but it's probably more of an update, at this point to let you know where things are at and what's been happening. The one item that is in progress is work to gather input from the area residents via a survey on desired preferences for uses. What's the scope of that survey, Kevin? How broad?
It'll be like a Survey Monkey, questionnaire that they'll fill out online, and asking about certain particular uses, heavily in favor or totally against, something on a sliding scale on certain particular uses that could go in there.
And geographically, what's the reach of the survey?
We're gonna be broad. I mean, I heard you, and we're gonna be broad going all the way down to Main Street,
Okay.
and probably include much of that downtown neighborhood. It's just gonna cost us a couple more stamps.
So that's in process, and then will that come back to plan?
Planning Commission.
We're doing a Survey Monkey, but we're sending, the mailing is to inform them of that?
Right, there'll actually be a link in the letter that they, some of, I probably couldn't figure it out, but you can scan it in, so you don't have to
A lot of
punch
people
it in.
don't know how to do that.
But we'll have it linked to our website, so we'll have an easy link that they can look up on our website in order to get, we want to be able to track their information, so we don't have, one person it taking 25 times. So we'll have a control so that, each household would be able to fill one out.
And it can be easy. Some people are just not good with technology in those surveys, so I don't want them to be excluded because they're uncomfortable.
Yeah, and they'll also have the ability to get a printed copy and be able to turn one in.
When will that be starting?
In the next couple of weeks, we'll get it out.
So that's underway. A number of the potential users that we've discussed before and you've heard about remain interested and continue to ask questions about the property and our status. So I think the discussion is timely for us to consider our options going forward. Millhouse Quilts remains interested. In fact, as recently as in the last week, I think, we touched base with them about where things stand with the owners of that property and their interest in possibly purchasing it, their existing building, along with the potential for the library site for them. The school district has indicated some interest. You read about it just as I did in the Tribune a few weeks ago. The school district board is planning to tour the library as a whole, their whole board, next Monday. And then I think have continued ongoing discussion about it. Randy Gutenberg has asked me for, utility billing information and some details about the age of the infrastructure. So they're evaluating this site for potential interest as well, along with probably I'd say 6 or 7 various different users have inquired about the property. So my answer to them to this point has been that Kevin's process, for example, is part of the evaluation that continues. And I'm not able yet, because I don't have the direction from the board, to tell the users whether we intend to go out for a sealed bid process to sell the property, whether we care to pursue a particular single user, or whether we'll simply put it on the market. I guess the fourth option is whether we consider it for another municipal use. And the only thing I can think of in that realm would be whether we saw fit for reuse of this building for a different purpose and have Village Hall function out of that space, which is possible. So that's the scope of the story to this point. And happy to try and answer questions. I kind of feel like I'm leaving a lot of things unanswered, but frankly, that's kind of how it feels at this point in the process.
Questions for Todd before I have mine?
Is there anything on this survey that asks specifically about Would you like to see a retail location, or would you like to see this as a school site?
Yeah, we'll try and hit on all those.
All right.
Are we having a meeting with the neighbors? We're just doing it by survey? It's really hard to have a discussion and really lay out the issues by a survey. You know, because I think this is the issue of zoning and its impact, long-term, short-term, et cetera. You're not gonna capture that in your survey at all. And people may not even be thinking about it, but once they think about it, they might have a different opinion.
Yeah, I think that'll be up to the planning commission.
For the board.
Any other questions? So my question, Todd, in your discussions with Randy, did they feel they were gonna have to take this to a referendum at some point before they would make the decision?
Well, that's what sort of changed for the school district is the passage of time from their last referendum. When I had very early discussions with Randy about the property 3 or so years ago, they're right off the heels of the intermediate school referendum, a major project for them. And to even conceive fitting this property into another referendum at that point just wasn't there yet. So again, time passed. We don't have a solution for the old library at the moment. And there may be, well, you've seen the articles just like I have about their process to consider their next referendum. I don't know the mention of some elementary rehab or middle school. I'm not sure exactly. But they're getting close, like within a year and a half of their next process. So they see potential, if there's a feasible use for this for them, of including that in a referendum process. Now, the challenge for us is we're moving to the new library August 1. That's a long time. That's a long time for a vacant building to sit and be mothballed. So that's why the decision-making process comes back to you in terms of aggressiveness and whether we want to put it out there now for potential use to unload the asset, so to speak, or be patient and await more school district info. And I think I'll know more from Randy after they tour it. I could probably in a month or two, I can give you an update from them. But again, at that point, we've got the moving vans ready.
So I'm being careful with how I phrase this, because I don't want it to come across the wrong way with what I say. Based on how you just described that, my concern is that we're moving out in August. If the school board decides to go forward with this, and they take it with their next referendum, by the time that goes through, we're talking about a year to a year and a half carrying costs for us during that time, when we have potential other buyers that we could be selling to right now. That's what we have to consider right now. Would I like to see the school district have it and be in their, it's right on their property, basically, so yeah, I'd love it for that. But what happens if we go through that process and it takes taken to referendum and the taxpayers say no? Then where does that leave us? We've just pushed off potential buyers. So
We don't really know
we
who
have
the
to,
buyers are and how much they're offering yet either, whether it's significant or not. We need to see the whole picture.
which is the conversation that we have to have, is what I'm getting at. Since we're not that far away, it's why it's on the agenda tonight. One of the reasons is that for us to have this discussion publicly, to see if we have users. We're going through our survey. Our survey should be back in a month or so, roughly. Once that's back, we can know what the neighbors feel, or have a good idea what they're gonna be okay with in that area. We have potential buyers. Do we wait for the school?
Do we know what the carrying costs are?
They're not that, they don't pay taxes anyway. You can
Yeah, they don't
shut it
pay
down
taxes.
to minimal maintenance for a while. It's not gonna be that expensive.
I mean, we've gathered some of the electricity costs and things like that. I don't remember them off the
That's
top
when
of my
it's
head.
open. You're gonna.
Right, yes, I mean, you
Yeah, the lights
turn down the
wouldn't-
Where the
heat,
costs
turn
are,
off the
though.
lights.
Right.
Where the costs are is that we have that figured into our new library, having sold that building.
Well,
So the longer we have that, we don't have that money going in that we're paying additional for that as well. so.
But we'd be carrying
Debt
borrowed,
loader.
yeah, debt
Yeah.
load.
I thought they raised
Debt
more
load.
money than they needed to, or our costs came in less, so there is some wiggle room in there.
Well, it's fair to say that the numbers are still coming in, you know,
Right.
the final
Donations
construction.
are still coming.
We're getting
Um,
change orders? What do you mean they're still coming in? There's change orders.
Oh, well, I mean, donations are still coming in,
Oh,
so that's
yeah.
bringing in revenue, but right, there's still change orders and things like that coming in too. I mean,
As part of the whole motto, we had a placeholder
oh,
of
right,
800,000?
850,000 or something
Yeah.
for the sale of the library. So if it didn't sell for a while, we would carry our,
We're carrying that debt is what I'm getting
yeah.
at.
Yeah, well, I think we have to wait to see. We may not even get an offer for 850. We might get an offer for less.
Understood, so that, I'm just trying to get this discussion out there for us to be thinking, how we wanna handle this. Are we gonna put it out to bid? Are we gonna wait for the school district to
We need-
decide? Once we know what potentially can go there from our survey from Kevin?
We need to find out what the area around it will support and make sure they understand what that means, so that we could take that and then decide that.
I agree.
So let's get it done. But I don't really like, I wish we were having a public meeting as well to explain more.
I think maybe after the survey, maybe a public meeting would make sense to say, hey, here's what the survey, you know, is saying. Because a lot of times you can have 3 people in the room that dominate the whole discussion, and you can have 50 people there, but
But what does a survey mean if people don't understand it and you have the results? Wouldn't you want to explain it first and then do the survey?
We discussed this at the planning commission and,
Well,
The
no,
blank-
not a survey,
yeah, we directed Kevin to do that,
to do a mailing.
to do a survey of the residents. And
Yeah,
we
survey, but I
expanded
didn't
that
know
whole
it was,
scope.
I didn't know it was that kind of a survey, but if everybody's comfortable, people are gonna understand and they get the right information,
I think we leave that to Kevin.
yeah.
I think we hear that concern, which leads to us assembling a survey in the right way and being prepared and ready to answer questions during the survey process too, for anybody who might have them.
I just get a lot of those surveys and I end up with more questions than answers from them, but.
Okay, so,
We'll work to keep the board informed. I think there's a number of moving parts and depending on outcomes, we might need to be nimble on our approach. So we'll have this as frequently as needed as an item for discussion with the board.
okay, everybody? Okay. Last item, we have discuss and take action on settlement from Madison Environmental Resourcing, Inc. Is this closed?
Yep, this is closed. We don't expect action out of closed session, but we will take the same approach as we did last time, where any citizens who care to remain can stay in here, and we'll go to a different room in the building for the closed session part. But I don't believe there is action expected.
Okay, so the village board should I read this, Brian? The village board may convene in closed session as authorized by Wisconsin statute 19.851G for the purpose of conferring with legal counsel for the village board who is rendering oral or written advice concerning strategy to be adopted by the village board with respect to litigation in which it is or is likely to become involved. The village board may reconvene in open session and discuss as, lost my page. Discuss as needed,
Discuss and take action on the
she's
subject
closed.
matter discussed in
Okay,
closed
cool.
session.
all right, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
you don't have that
So I-
memorized yet?
I'd have a, sorry, Gary. I need a motion to go in closed session.
So moved.
I'm gonna give it to Phil, second. Susan, roll call, please.
Trustee Zickelberger?
yes.
Trustee Springman? Ms. Springman?
Oh, yes.
Bill Branham?
Yep.
Bill Wellman?
Yep.
Gary
thanks.
Hirschberg?
Yes.
President Zellner?
Yes.
Well,